the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. Interesting piece a few weeks ago in the New York Times by Pamela Paul. She's been on the show, an op-ed entitled, "You've Been Wrong. That Doesn't Make You Right." And Paul suggests that we are living in a golden age of aggrievement. No matter who you are or what your politics, whatever your ethnic origin, economic circumstance, family history, or mental health status, chances are you have ample reason to be ticked off. We all feel as if we are wronged. And appropriately enough, there's a new book out called Wronged: The Weaponization of Victimhood by my guest today, Lilie Chouliaraki. She teaches media at the London School of Economics, and she's speaking to us from a very hot Athens. Lilie, wronged. Are we all wrong these days? What's gone wrong?
Well, at least a lot of people are claiming to be wrong today. And I would say that some might be right indeed, but many might not. And therefore, the book is about trying to work out as much as it is possible the difference between the two. So the kind of first thing that I want to show with my, kind of work on victimhood is how complicit claiming to be a victim is to power. How it is used, in other words, as a linguistic weapon, particularly by the already powerful, to gain even more power. We usually think of victims as powerless and passive, and this is the case when we talk about, for instance, vulnerable individuals or marginalized communities who suffer injustice, as you said, trauma, etc., etc. But more and more, we hear powerful individuals claiming that they're victims, and there that happens because they want to gain particular benefits. Think of far-right populists, for instance. I mean, they are the biggest victims of all by their own words, and in fact, Donald Trump is one of the cases I talk about in detail.
Trump is a very good example. But Lilie, some people will be watching this and thinking, here's a woman who wants to have her moral cake and eat it. Are you suggesting that when some people believe they're wrong, they're not, and some people are? Is that your argument in wrong?
Well, no, I would never claim that. I do not think moral evaluations on somebody's feelings of trauma or feelings of injustice. I think everyone has the right to claim that they are victims. I think what our role is, and our responsibility perhaps as citizens is not to rush out and emotionally identify with whichever claim to victimhood is being put forward, but we need to deconstruct the claim to victimhood. We need to ask the right questions around victimhood. And part of what I do in the book is separate precisely those two things. Claim, something that is about language, about speaking out and saying that you're a victim, and context. Which context are you speaking from? Which position of power or vulnerability do you occupy? What are your privileges, and what are your vulnerabilities in relation to different forms of power, for instance, and violence? Which position do you occupy in the continuum of social privilege, race, class, gender, sexuality, age, ability, where you stand in relation to an intersection of those also defines your social position as a whole, and will place you as being vulnerable towards, certain forms of violence, but also you might be sheltered from other forms of violence. All of us live in intersections of privilege and vulnerability. So when we hear claims to victimhood, we need to ask the questions of where does that person stand in that social continuum? It is just that we are not used to thinking about victimhood in those terms. When we hear the word victim, we think of powerlessness, we think of passivity. And when we think privilege, we think, oh, this person has it all. It cannot possibly be a victim. Or if privileged people want to claim victimhood, they hide their privilege to some extent. So my proposition is, no, we all live in intersections of the two, and we need to be very careful about evaluating claims to victimhood from the different positions throughout that continuum. Where we are all kind of defined by and are situated in.
This reminds me all of Orwell's great essay, Politics in the English Language. Your book, the title, The Weaponization of Victimhood, leaving aside the other W word, wrong. What does weaponization mean? I hate that word. Everybody uses it all the time. Are you suggesting, perhaps in your own way, you teach communications at the London School of Economics, so perhaps this is an inevitable consequence of your work, that the core political issue these days is language and how we use it? Because I don't even know what does weaponization mean?
It is using particular words, and I think victimhood is a very strategic word in the English language. In order to gain particular benefits, you use the word victim at the service of power. Everyone does that. But it is weaponization when that is happening from a perspective of already powerful actors who want to claim victimhood in order to gain moral righteousness and speak with more authority and more legitimacy about the cause that they want to serve. Let me just give you an example. Think about Putin's justification for invading Ukraine, for instance, right? His keyword was denazification. Now, Ukrainians were, classed as Nazis, and so, and also the kind of allies of Ukraine, the West, were also thought of as perpetrators of some kind. The Russian army was thought of in that linguistic system as heroic protectors of their land. And of course, the whole invasion, which was illegal by international law standards and immoral, was cast as a moral cause. It was something that, some kind of moral righteousness was injected into this simply by using the word denazification and victimizing Russia as a result. So that is what weaponization is. Powerful actors appropriating the language of victimhood in order to gain power, gain legitimacy, gain moral authority over others. And as I said earlier, the far right seem to be the expert users of this practice of weaponization today.
And then how would you distinguish, and you've used the example of Trump, who seems to be exhibit A in all this stuff, although he's playing at the game of victimhood. It's hard to know how serious he is. You've mentioned the Russians, and then say Black Lives Matter. I know you talk about them. What's the difference between a sense of grievance and a victimhood of African Americans, which sparked the Black Lives Matter movement, and Trump or Putin? How do you distinguish? Is it just a question of opinion? You're making a call that African Americans, I'm guessing, are genuine victims, so that they have a right to be wronged, so to speak?
Well, I mean, that kind of sketching out of the problem as one opinion on the one hand and another opinion on the other, so that there can be two sides to victimhood, and we fight between us in order to kind of dominate the conversation, doesn't really lead us anywhere. I do not think that there is a kind of perfect tool to work out, whose victimhood matters more than others. But what we can do is start asking questions that perhaps can lead us to the kind of structural circumstances of the suffering and the pain that is being claimed in the language of victimhood. And I think that's where the book starts from. It starts with a very explicit attachment to, commitment to, and interest in having the vulnerability, the systemic vulnerability of groups that are marginalized, that are oppressed because of, as I said earlier, gender and race or class circumstances, etc., having their victimhood articulated in our public conversations, rather than powerful people who kind of claim it for their own. And because they have more power,
but who, Lilie, it comes back to the same question: who's going to determine who's powerful? Some people argue that professors at fancy universities like you in sociology or communications, you're the ones with the power. Others argue it's people in industry or in politics. Ultimately, doesn't this come down to a subjective notion of what power exactly is?
No, I don't think it is all subjective. As I said, I think determining the victimhood status of anyone is a tricky business, and it is always an imperfect game.
And do we quantify victimhood? In other words, when you kill 6 million people, then you're victims, but if you only kill 5, you're not. I mean, how do you do this? And of course, there's the whole psychological consequence as well. I mean, contemporary African Americans haven't experienced literally slavery, but they're all living in the shadows of it. So are they victims? Are they not? This stuff is so hard to define, to quantify, isn't it?
It is. It is hard to quantify. At the same time, we have by now a whole body of literature across the social sciences, in political science, in sociology, in psychology, even in media and communications, where we talk about digital inequalities, among other things, in history, right, in feminist and gender studies, in post-colonial studies, that have meticulously and scientifically registered, the kind of the social geography of society. And we know which groups are most vulnerable than others. We know which ones are most exposed to violence than others. And these are always connected with social parameters like, for instance, race or gender or sexuality.
Well, but again, you would say that because you're at a LSE, which this kind of stuff is spoken about 24 hours a day, and this language is rejected by some people. Anyway, let's take a musical break, Lilie. We need a little refreshment. We'll take a musical break, and then we'll come back and talk with Lilie Chouliaraki in Athens about Wrong, the Weaponization of Victimhood. We're going to take a musical break, refresh ourselves.
Like Andrew Keane, yeah. He's my friend, daring questions he won't hold back. Got me sweating under the attack. No soft spoken, he's in your face, challenging minds. No time to waste, scary dude, his words like fire. Gonna make you think, take you higher. Keen on the truth, he breaks it down. No sugarcoating, he wears the crown. He'll make you squirm, he'll make you think. Never predictable, always on the brink.
We're back with Lilie Chouliaraki in Athens, the author of Wrong, the Weaponization of Victimhood. Lilie, I wonder, the person who comes to mind in all this, who predicted this and warned us about it, is Nietzsche, particularly in his great work, early work, 1887, The Genealogy of Morality, in which he suggested that the slave morality of Christianity was about to come back and bite us. And the more people sensed they were victims, the more power they would have. Is Nietzsche, the intellectual, shadow that lies over us in our obsession with who is more or less wronged and victimized?
Well, I think the genealogy of victimhood goes further back. I mean, we can talk about antiquity and the way that, antiquity, Western antiquity, dealt with victims. But if we just stick to the Enlightenment, and particularly the Scottish Enlightenment, and Adam Smith, his theory of society was all about the morality of sympathy, right? Which corresponds to something like empathy today. And the kind of exemplary figure around which citizens should be judged as moral or not was the distant sufferer. So how do we position ourselves vis-a-vis people who suffer? So the language of victimhood is absolutely integral to the ways in which the Enlightenment and early and late modernity have thought about contemporary societies and helping others and being open to understanding and responding to the plights of people in pain. Has been a mark of good citizenship ever since.
But Nietzsche argued that to get beyond all this sense of victimhood and morality, good and evil, we had to quite literally, and he wrote a famous book about this, of course, Beyond Good and Evil. Is the answer to this, you seem to be suggesting the answer to this is more morality, more sense of community and politics. But another argument might be that we just need to stop thinking about morality and think of things in a more perhaps Machiavellian sense.
Well, I mean, I don't think we should think about morality. I mean, the book is not about moralizing, and pointing the finger to who is a victim and who is not. We were just, talking about how do you define victims. I mean, another example, going away from Ukraine and Putin, just going into the pandemic this time, who were the people who suffered most? Who were really vulnerable and who were really victimized in the US as much as in the UK? They were all the migrants, low-wage workers. It was the racial and ethnic minorities. It was particularly Black women. Those people who were, overrepresented in jobs that could not be done remotely, and therefore they got exposed to, COVID and got sick, and many of them died much more than, the white middle classes. And also, I've also talked about the far right, which is an absolute kind of central element of critique in the book. We are now living at a time when far right parties and leaders are in power, or they are about to come in power. Their voice is certainly very loud in societies, both in the global north and in the global south. And I think, what we need to think about is not moralize what they say or what they do, is start developing a language about justice, right? So everything...
Well, we've been working on that. You're in Athens, been working on that for 2,500 years, a language of justice. Where do we find that, Lilie? I mean, do we go back to the Republic and Socrates' search for its definition of the word? Or is it just your version of justice? Because everyone has different versions. If we had a Trumpian Republican on, their definition would be very different from yours.
Yes, no, I think that's right. There isn't just one definition of justice, but I think that we need to start talking about questions of economic redistribution, right? We know that we live, for instance, in a world where, according to major economists of our times, in terms of income inequalities, for example, we are almost coming full circle back to the moment, before the First World War, where the gap between the richest and the poorest is the greatest since then. So there are really urgent reasons why we should collectively try and define a new vocabulary that goes beyond appeals to "I am a victim," appeals which usually are being claimed by the powerful because they are the ones that are, they are more have more authority, have more access to the media, the public sphere. They are primed by social media algorithms, etc., and collectively try and kind of create those movements and develop those cogent, coherent, justificatory arguments that explain why this is the moment to address structural inequality and not simply claims to victimhood.
Yeah, I'm not sure everyone would agree. And coming back to Trump, who's a master of this language of victimhood and of being wronged, and in a sense, as he sits in the courtroom or various courtrooms, he even has the choreography now to justify his way of thinking about the world. It seems as if Trump is, I mean, you can argue that he's a victim, you can argue he's a powerful white man, blah, blah. I don't want to get into that. But what's happening in the US, and certainly Putin is true, and perhaps Meloni in Italy, and many other right-wing radical leaders who peddle the idea of victimhood, that it is indeed the victims who are attracted to that. They're not attracted to your abstract theories of justice. The left is increasingly distanced from what the left used to call the working class, maybe the precariat or the underclass, whatever term you want. So why is it that, for example, Trump is increasingly popular with people who have truly been wronged, who are real victims, the people of West Virginia, poor white people, and increasingly, oddly enough, poor brown and black people too?
Yeah, I mean, I think suffering, as I said, and I think here you're kind of fundamentally you agree with me that we have a basic problem of social inequality, a problem of economic redistribution.
I didn't agree with you. I'm not. I'm just saying that there's always been inequality. I don't think I agree with you that we're back in the late 19th century, but that's another issue. I mean, that's a question.
Yeah, no, I didn't claim that, but yeah, okay. So I think those people are there, and they do feel abandoned. They do feel left behind, but the feeling on its own and the kind of destitution and marginalization on its own doesn't necessarily constitute a political position. You need to create a narrative around that in order to mobilize people behind.
You're losing me, Lilie. It's a lot of academic talk of mobilization, blah, blah, blah. People, for better or worse, we live in a social media age. People are angry. People have the technological tools now to express themselves. That's the reality, isn't it?
Well, but that's exactly what I'm saying. So Trump has found the language of victimhood, the language of emotions, the language to directly kind of touch on what these people are feeling. But the story that he's creating around that is actually hurting them more. And what we
hurting who?
Hurting those same people the more. Because he's not really giving.
Well, but isn't that a very elitist argument that people, and we've had this argument or this conversation so many times on the show, the what's the matter with Kansas argument, that poor people vote for wealthy, powerful men like Trump against their own interests, but that really makes them it makes them sound a bit dim-witted. They clearly like Trump, for better or worse. I wouldn't vote for him, but they do.
What I'm saying is that there is a problem with the political stories we tell. And as long as there isn't a convincing alternative that speaks to those people about their experiences of pain in ways that projects hope and brings them together in a kind of new ways in which they could be, they could have a better life, then people like Trump, with their own, stories of the migrants are responsible for this, or, some other scapegoat is responsible for this. Vote for me. The elites are corrupt. And that kind of nihilism that rejects completely, democracy and its institutions is going to prevail. So what is the alternative to that? That's what I'm asking.
Let's take a break, Lily, and then we'll come to talk about the progressive alternative, how to I don't like this word, but I can't think of another one, appropriate the language of victimhood in a progressive way. So we are talking with Lilie Chouliaraki, the author, LSE academic, the author of Wrong, the Weaponization of Victimhood. It's good stuff, good, healthy, intellectual argument. I want to thank our friends at Liberties, a quarterly of culture and politics, for bringing us such great guests as Lilie Chouliaraki. I'm going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then we'll be back to talk about a more positive way of responding to the weaponization of victimhood. So we'll be back in a second. Hold on, everyone.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Lilie Chouliaraki, a professor at the London School of Economics and the author of an interesting new book, Wrong, the Weaponization of Victimhood. We know what we don't like. We don't like the way in which Donald Trump seems to be successfully weaponizing the idea of victimhood for political reasons. So, Lilie, what does progressives, what do the left do? Do they fall back on social science and alienate whatever support they've got left? Or do they come up with their own narrative, which makes sense, which borrows from Trump, but at the same time does good rather than evil?
Yeah, I don't think we need to borrow from Trump, but I do think that social sciences actually have a lot to offer in their own language of science to clear the grounds and to talk about structural vulnerability for what it is, right? Historical and
nobody reads that, Lilie. You're an academic. Nobody wants to read social science. It's a turn-off rather than a turn-on.
But it is important in informing conversations. I do not represent a political party, and I cannot tell you what the left can do or has to do. I think these are conversations that need to be had. I just think that I haven't seen at the moment in the UK or the US kind of a party that puts forward an agenda for structural inequalities, for economic redistribution, for stronger efforts to representation and a widening of participation in society. Whatever we have seen in the past few years are the results of claims to victimhood made collectively and not individually through social media and through far-right leaders. For instance, through movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter that have done a lot in speaking out in the name of those who are, victimized, killed, marginalized, left out, excluded, etc., etc. So I think there are ways, and we have historical examples and contemporary examples of movements who have gone in that direction. And I think we can learn from what they have done. But in terms of my own work, because what I have done is a study on the language of victimhood. I think what I'm trying to argue in the book is that we need to start asking questions that are not simply questions of, is this victim real? Is their suffering true, et cetera, et cetera? Because as we started off saying, you can't really get to the bottom of that. Nobody can deny any victim, how they are feeling, and that would be immoral. But I think we can start kind of deconstructing what victimhood means and where it's spoken from with questions like, what is the context where that particular appeal to victimhood is being made. How much context is provided, who speaks, like what kind of status or authority do they have, what kind of alliances are they trying to build, what emotions are they projecting, what communities are they trying to kind of bring together, what strategies of justification do they put forward. I think these are ways in which we can kind of bypass the kind of emotional onslaught that the struggles of victimhood kind of bring into the public conversations, because victimhood is a very emotional term that sparks emotions.
Is someone doing this? Do you know of work that addresses this in a way that doesn't just bore people, put people to sleep, turn them off?
I think a lot of social movements already doing that. I mean, remember when the Me Too broke out? There was a struggle there. There were, women coming out and saying, I've been abused, and these are claims to victimhood.
But what would be the difference between, say, the Me Too movement in the context of the weaponization of victimhood and the Phyllis Schlafly's movement of anti-feminist movement of the 60s and 70s? Is there a difference, or is it simply that you approve of one and you don't like the other?
No, I just want to say that at the same time as we had the Me Too claims by women, by hundreds of thousands, millions of women around the world, we also had the counter claims by powerful men saying, I am the one who's wronged. I am the one who's now being put up to the spotlight, and I'm being blamed wrongly. And that was a moment of a movement where eventually the voices of women created a new language of recognition. Right? Believe women, for instance, was one of them, or I believe you, my sister. These and created a kind of the conditions of believability and the conditions for women to be believed and heard much more than the men, who were up to that point the most powerful actors. They held all the power, hence the silence for decades by those women. So those questions that I just put forward, they are being asked. And they are being answered. And that's how movements work. So I'm not saying anything new or boring. I think, I am just putting together the experience of people who have already fought for justice and against the individualization of victimhood as a strategy of power, so that we can perhaps see a better future.
So what about the arguments of conservatives that universities like the London School of Economics are dominated by progressive academics, probably like yourself, that they have no voice, that they're victims? Is that a legitimate argument?
Well, no, I mean, I think I would say any university, including actually the London School of Economics, is not, a bastion of this or that. I think every university, has all sorts of different individuals in it, and there is always a struggle of ideas and a struggle of values and opinions. So just as much as I can talk and write a book like the one we're just discussing right now, so there are other people who might be claiming perhaps the opposite of that. And I think we can both coexist, and we can have robust arguments. And I think that is what academic debate is about. And I think, let's see how, who is right in the end through that process of argumentation and debate in public.
Let's end with some definitions of language. I mentioned Orwell's great essay, Politics in the English Language, which certainly should be reread in the context of this issue. The G word comes up a lot. There was an incident recently. A nurse at NYU, New York University, got fired after calling the Gaza war a genocide. People now talk about not buying China manufacturing goods because of the so-called China genocide. In Israel, of course, the G word, genocides associated with the Holocaust. How much should we try to be careful about the words we use in terms of the weaponization of victimhood? Should we be a little bit more responsible in throwing around words like especially a word like genocide that's so explosive.
Yes, I mean, especially in the context of Gaza, as you put it, I think we need to be quite careful. And I think we need to be quite careful precisely because looking at the situation historically, there is victimhood on both sides. There is historical victimhood for Jewish people and Israeli Jews as well through the kind of whole history of the Holocaust and centuries of persecution. And there is also the victimhood of the October 7th. So I want to take that out of the kind of the rest of the discussion. I want to take that for granted because this is a truth. Having said that, however, we have seen since then, since October the 7th, the continuous, relentless and cruel victimization of the Palestinian people. And I think much as we need to be careful, we also need to be precise in the vocabulary of suffering and pain that we use in that conflict, and we take our cue to that for that by the institutions of global governance. I mean, I think we have the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. We have major NGOs that have already provided us with the language to talk about that conflict and to put into words the kind of incredible massacre of the killing of thousands of Palestinians that we are.
Finally, Lilie, am I rather naughty to sometimes enjoy other people's victimhood? It gives me, I have to admit, I probably shouldn't. I'll get fired, although I can't get fired because I don't have a boss. But I've rather enjoyed seeing Harvey Weinstein shuffle in and out of court recently. He's back in the news and he's back under investigation. He looks worse and worse, closer and closer to death. I have to admit, I rather enjoy that. He's clearly a victim of the system, although, of course, it's entirely just what's happened to him. Should we sometimes enjoy watching other people's victimhood, or am I naughty here?
Well, I don't think the language of enjoyment necessarily goes into it, even though I know that, there are obviously arguments.
Did you enjoy it? Do you ever enjoy watching justice done, Lilie?
I think if we move away from the language of victimhood, you've just did and talked about justice, I think, of course, it is incredibly important for women who have been abused serially and for decades to see the perpetrators being put in jail and being punished, and for them to be able to speak out and share their painful truth with others.
So I'm not naughty, in other words.
Well, I think that is something you should decide.
Can I step on the